I'm just going to use the microphone to speak to the crowd. Thanks. No problem. Everyone, I just want to let you know, Senator Albert had my leap scheduled at 8:30, so we're going to start a few minutes late, give him a chance to do his vote in my leap and come over. I don't want to start without him being present, so we're going to have a few more minutes, but I appreciate your patience. The Committee on Labor is called to order. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Chairman Cherry,
Here.
Senator Camilleri,
Here.
Senator Kavanaugh, Senator Albert. Mr. Chair, you have 4 members present. There's a quorum.
Thank you, and I appreciate everybody's patience. At this time, I'm going to entertain a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from April 17th, so moved by Senator Camilleri. Without objection, the minutes are adopted. And we have 2 bills up for testimony. They're companion bills. Senate Bill 6, introduced by Senator Hertel, and Senate Bill 7, introduced by Senator Camilleri. They're up for testimony, and I'd welcome Senators Hertel and Camilleri to speak on their bills.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking up these important Senate bills today, and good morning to other members of the committee. Senator Albert is working hard this morning. I want to acknowledge some of our friends who are here in the room with us today that joined us at a press conference a few weeks ago to talk about this important issue, an issue that addresses payroll fraud here in the state of Michigan and ultimately protects workers across our state. Workers and small business owners have shared firsthand the consequences these scams inflict on honest, hard-working people that are just trying to get by. Because ultimately, when bad actors steal wages, we all pay the price. Whether you're a worker who's having a paycheck that is shortchanged, a contractor trying to fairly win a bid against someone who disregards the rules, or a taxpayer who is forced to foot the bill for all of that at the end of the day. Payroll fraud affects all of us, and that's exactly why Senator Camilleri and I introduced these bills. Diving into exactly what this legislation does, Senate Bill 6 would enhance wage transparency for workers by requiring an employer to disclose wage information for similarly situated employees within 30 days of another employee's request. It would strengthen civil penalties for wage theft to 100% annual wage and benefits due to an employee compared to the current 10%. 3 times the wages due to an employee instead of 2 times as it currently is, and a civil fine of $10,000 to be credited to the state's general fund, as well as the increase of criminal penalties for wage theft on a tiered system similar to Michigan's embezzlement law. The legislation would prohibit employees from misclassifying workers as independent contractors, which currently allows them to pay a wage lower than the legal minimum wage. And I want to be very clear, this is to go after those who are misclassifying people as independent contractors here in the state. And finally, this bill would allow workers to file anonymous complaints against their employers. In short, this legislation is about accountability, it's about fairness, and it's about protecting Michigan workers and taxpayers alike. Because at the end of the day, every Michigander deserves to know that our economy rewards hard work and not corner cutting by bad actors. And I know we have many Michiganders from various professions here today who will echo this sentiment. And so I appreciate the committee's support of these bills. And I just want to acknowledge that we have been working on a substitute over the last few weeks with stakeholders. I don't think we're quite there yet. We are trying to make sure that we go after those who are actually bad actors and who are misclassifying people here in the state. And so we are going to continue those conversations in the coming days, and I think we can get to a good product for all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and fellow colleagues on the committee. Waste, fraud, and abuse. We hear a lot about it. It's the big topic of the day. One of the things that we are attempting to go after is waste, fraud, and abuse, specifically when we're talking about stolen wages. In 2022, the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity found more than $2.6 million in stolen wages from our hardworking Michigan residents. This is money that could have gone towards a family purchasing a new vehicle, putting a down payment on a house, or assisted with paying a child's college tuition. Instead, this $2.6 million was pocketed by employers who prioritized profits and not the livelihood of their workers, which to me is unacceptable. These practices have gone on far too long here in our state, which is why I was proud to join Senator Hertel in introducing this package. What we've seen from certain employers is a failure to pay minimum wage, violation of overtime requirements, and wrongful classification of employees as independent contractors so that they can pay lower wages and avoid providing the benefits and worker rights that Michigan employees are entitled to. It is clear from our conversations with the victims of this fraud that we need to take action to hold these employers accountable and increase the penalties for bad actors here in the state of Michigan. My legislation, Senate Bill 7, will increase the penalties and fines for any employer that is found in violation of wage or benefit theft to ensure that they are acting in the best interest of their workforce. Thank you for the opportunity today. Happy to take any questions. And again, to Senator Hertel's point, there is a substitute that is being worked on. And so if you are truly an independent contractor, in a profession where you are not held to a different standard, or you've got people who work in the same industry who you could be classified as an employee, we're not talking about you. If you're truly an independent contractor, you should be fine. We're talking about folks who are misclassified. That is the key piece here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Hertel and Camilleri. Members, are there questions for Senator Albert?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's hard to kind of talk about a hypothetical sub, so I guess I'll have to wait until there's language to actually, I guess, to figure out misclassification, what that means, and in your definitions that you'll provide in that. It's hard for me to think of a time in my career where I've seen rhetoric that is so different than the reality than this example right here. Multiple times the word fraud was used in stealing. And of course, you know, from an ethical standpoint, like if those are being violated, if there is fraud going on, if there is stealing going on, then it's just for the government to step in and right that wrong. Can you explain how, like, where are you getting that? Because like all I'm seeing from this bill is loss of opportunity. Is anybody being coerced that you're aware of to taking a job that they don't want to do?
So I don't think it's taking a job that they don't want to do, but I think it's when they take that job and the method in which they're paid as compared to other employees that are in the exact same role or situation. And you're going to hear today from small business owners who have had to compete against other businesses who bid for contracts in this way. And you're going to hear from workers as well who have been affected. So I'm not going to tell those stories. I think their stories mean a lot more than me sitting here and telling you those stories. And I want to be clear to your point about the sub. What we've been trying to do, because where we see a lot of this payroll fraud take place is within the construction trades. And that's the stories you'll hear today. And so we've been trying to tailor this to really focus at that problem. And so we're not bringing in gig workers and other folks that are truly independent contractors. We want to make sure we're tailoring this exactly to where the problem is, where we see it. And I think once you hear some of those stories, it will be made more clear.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more follow-up?
A follow-up? Yep.
The prime example of legislation like this going into effect is California. And can you talk about what happened in California? There's been, I think, 119-ish exemptions that have now been put in place in the law, clearly showing that should be a demonstration alone that there's a lot of flaws in this concept. So, you know, looking at what happened in California, what could we expect to happen in Michigan?
You know, the California situation, I think, primarily did aim at going after the gig economy. I mean, that's clear, right? I mean, they went after the attempting to regulate Uber drivers and DoorDash drivers and those types of jobs. That is not specifically what we're going after today. I think that, yes, in the original introduction, it was a very broad bill. We're talking about a sub. We can have a conversation about gig workers. I think that that's a valid one because I think in some of these discussions, gig workers are full-time employees and they use that work as a full-time job. Many of the gig workers, though, they pick up one shift and they go drop off one delivery. That's a pure independent contractor type position. That's a much more nuanced conversation than what we're talking about today. You've got construction workers who work full-time jobs. They're going to detail their experiences today, but the people that they work for believe that they're 1099 contractors. That's not true. right? They're paid under that system, and those employers should be paying taxes. They're not. That's a problem that we're trying to address here today.
So to clarify, Senator Hertel, when you refer to a sub, the hope on that sub is to focus in within the construction industry?
That's the direction we're moving.
Yep.
The sub that has been shared with many of the folks who we've been working with, I think the intent is clear. We've been able to classify the workers that we're including within this legislation from the federal job code to construction trades. I think there's some question around the definition of independent contractor within the bill, and that's something we're continuing to work on with our policy folks and with those stakeholders as well. And I think given where the changes we made in the last few days, I think it's pretty clear the intent of what we're trying to get to. We just need to make sure that folks are comfortable where we're going. And to the point of Senator Albert, and just to follow up on Senator Kamler's comments a little bit, I think we've looked at what happened in California. That's exactly why we're having the conversations that we're having and working to make sure we focus this bill on where we need to actually solve a problem. And that's protecting workers here in Michigan, and that's what I believe this bill will do.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony and appreciate you introducing the bills. And at this time, we're going to have some additional folks come up for testimony. And I'd like to start with Mike Johnson, Jr. Excuse me. Okay. This does say Johnson. Michigan Regional Council of Carpenters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the rest of the committee for the opportunity to speak today as well. My name is...
Yeah, I want to apologize. I was corrected from the audience. Mike Johnson, I apologize. Jackson?
Well, just like this legislation, we'll get there together.
All right.
So,
Thank you.
So yes, my name is Mike Jackson, Jr. I'm a representative with the Michigan Regional Council of Carpenters and Millwrights, and I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 6 and 7 to urge swift passage so that they can become law. It's important to know that every day right now across the state, workers are being hurt by schemes that lower pay, deny benefits, and make workplaces less safe, and this is an emergency for American workers. How do we know this is an emergency? Because when workers come to us with their stories, we do conduct our own investigations to come up with that proof. To give my statements validity today, the MRCC has evidence of payroll fraud at jobs performed by a contractor in Michigan called National Ceiling and Partition. Rather than hire employees to do the work that the company has been awarded after a bidding process, NCP relies on a network of labor brokers and demands that everyone who does work, they must be deemed a so-called independent contractor. They've turned a blind eye and encouraged their labor brokers to pay workers in cash, under the table, ignore citizenship requirements to pursue lower and lower wages, and to continue misclassifying them as these so-called subcontractors. But let's be clear, people and employees do work, not business entities. A legitimate subcontractor would have a contract that spells out the scope, the price, provision of materials, and maintenance of effort. A legitimate subcontractor would hire employees to carry out the contracted work and would seek work from multiple sources and then determine the best way to carry out that work when its employees to turn a profit and not a day's pay. That doesn't exist here. Instead, labor brokers exploit a rotating pool of labor who work at NCP's explicit direction, wearing NCP uniforms and using tools and materials provided by NCP. They are employees of NCP by every legal definition and are intentionally being misclassified so they can profit by paying them less, avoiding payroll taxes and workers' comp insurance. They have misclassified workers as so-called subcontractors, but never have them sign a contract while directing them as an employer would direct their employees. So let's be clear. Employees performing labor for companies like this are entirely controlled by the company and are not an independent business by any definition. This leads to bad outcomes for workers. Some of the workers in the room today have been exploited by NCP's practices, and these are practices in which they've worked for weeks without pay, increasing NCP's profits through theft of wages and tax revenue, and reports of injuries not being properly handled because they're told You're an employee. You're not an employee. You're a subcontractor. And out of respect for their privacy and fear of retribution, we will keep their names private. Fear of retribution is one way that these schemes continue unabated, and we need this law. This is not a complete solution to the problems that workers face in the construction industry, but this is another tool in our toolbox to protect workers and hold contractors who use these schemes to conduct payroll fraud accountable. And again, I want to thank everybody's time today for our opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Members, do we have questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, and let's see if I can get this right, Evan Howe from Integrity Interiors.
You got the name right.
All right.
We're off
moving
to
in the
a
right
good
direction.
start. Yeah, thank you, Chairman Cherry and members of the committee for having me today. And I'm not, I don't know, number one, I guess I'll just say I'm a little nervous, and I think this is really cool, man, to see to see a Senate committee, and I feel very privileged and honored to be able to be a part of this conversation. As you mentioned, my name's Evan Howe. I'm one of the owners of Integrity Interiors, and we're a construction contractor in Michigan. We have a couple different locations and a couple hundred employees. We do interior systems, so that's, floors, ceilings, walls, kind of everything in between. We bid all over the state, primarily in mid-Michigan. We've went as far as the UP, though. We have a pretty good feel for the lay of the land in terms of commercial construction and larger commercial construction. I'm here today to talk about employee misclassification, what that looks like to us, what we've seen in the problems that have gone along with that. I've seen it hurt workers. A large portion of our staff today are people that have come from that system in that world. In their words, not mine, they've kind of wisened up. Problem is there's always a fresh group of a lot of times younger guys to sort of come in right behind that and fill that void. But it also hurts contractors, not just workers. It handicaps our ability to win contracts and win jobs in largely at the, because of the added costs that go into paying our workforce. We believe in having employees. Our employees have, we pay into workers' compensation, we pay payroll taxes. There's health care and retirement, and there's fringes for that. That accounts for almost half of our labor package hourly for our employees. It's a large cost. We feel they deserve it, though. I mean, and some of those things to me are just very, basic. I mean, if an individual's on our project and they fall off of our ladder doing work for us, there ought to be something in place for them to get some medical care and to be able to be taken care of, okay? And that's where the workers' compensation insurance comes from. It's a very large expense, probably a lot larger than it should be, I think, if everything was fair. But I don't want to get into that. I'm not a political guy. I respect the process, and I respect and appreciate what all of you do, but that's not me. I'm out there on the front lines. I compete for contracts. That's my daily role at Integrity, along with helping run the operation. Because we do this and because we employ our workforce, we can't compete often against the certain employers that don't. And within the industry, we all know who they are. I mean, you have a segment of contractors who operate the way that we do, okay? And then you have the ones that don't, and that number is growing. And so when we go to compete against these people and we see that they're bidding jobs, sometimes it becomes a fool's errand to even bid that job just because we know we can't get as low as them. You know, we'll routinely lose projects by 20 or 30%. To these contractors that operate this way, that can only be because of labor. Material prices are largely fixed. There's not a lot we can do to manipulate those costs, okay? And so that cut is coming from labor. You know, and so what I've seen through talking to these people, I even lived some of this early on in my career when I first got into the trades is, you know, and what I've seen is that these workers that enter into the system, they're trading their long-term security and they're in any long-term game for sometimes some short kind of lived paydays. And some of these workers can see a financial benefit early on by doing this. The good ones can certainly. The problem is they don't have any of these securities that come with being an employee. And so these contractors that we compete against, their entire workforce are their employees, okay? I mean, they're on every job for this company. They're told where to go, when to be there, what to do, all right? Yet they're not employees. They're classifying them as subcontractors. Okay, and so they're manipulating a system that's in place, and I don't know, fraud or, or some of the other, rhetoric that was used. Look, I don't know. I just know when you have a group, a labor force, okay, that's yours, and you expect things from them, all right, and you use them as an employee, but then you classify them as something else. Okay, that just, to me, that's wrong. To me, it's wrong. To me, it's manipulative, and it's exploiting, I think, a broken system. All right, and so, I mean, and I was telling somebody this morning, I mean, just the other day, a worker came in looking for a job. He was a man in his 60s, and he had subcontracted his whole life. He didn't get out of it, when he was younger, as many of them do. And he just had nothing, and it's sad to see. He didn't have health insurance, and he needed it, and he didn't have a retirement. And I understand, the argument could be made that, well, that was his choice, to stay in that field his whole life. And I understand that, but, but I just don't think it should have happened. But anyways, let me get back to my notes here. So the only way for us to then compete with these people would be to join them. And again, I've said I just don't think that's the right thing to do. We believe in having employees. We believe in providing them the securities that they deserve. And I just believe that's why we need legislation like this to help that. And it's shocking to me how widespread this has become. It's a problem that's not getting smaller. From my experience, is getting worse, and it's not isolated to one or two here or there. I mean, it's in every area that we actively bid. Okay, and so what we also see, and I'll just speak to kind of the other side of this, is that because they're so much lower than us, you might think, well, great, then that gives the owner some cost savings, okay? And sometimes I'm sure it does, when the work's performed correctly. But what we see is it's the same contractors that exploit this system are the same ones that cut corners on the job. All right, the retention of their labor force isn't great. Oftentimes, they don't have the experience and the seasoning that a company like us have. So what we end up doing is we end up coming in behind them a lot of times. Okay, and they're off on the next job. But we're coming in behind them to fix a lot of things, and then it ends up being a larger cost to the owner. This happens a lot on public schools, and it's really bad in that sector. This problem is because those bids are largely awarded just based on low number. It's just who can get lower. Okay, and so, and more of our work is becoming this type. So yeah, I stand here today in support of this type of action, and I just really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Members, you have questions? Senator Albert?
Maybe you don't know the answer to this question. Maybe I need to ask someone from, State Department or something, but it seems as if there's a 20-part test that the federal government puts in place for determining whether or not someone can be classified as an independent contractor. So in the situations you're discussing, is that 20-part test currently being violated in those situations?
Yeah, I've never heard of that 20-part test. I never had to do it when I was, and so maybe it's in place but not being enforced. I don't know, but my experience, I never did one when I subbed. That was 20 years ago, and I've never heard any of our people that were former subs who are employees now mention that.
I see some people nodding heads behind you. Maybe as the bill sponsors look at a sub in the future, if the law in place is currently being violated, I guess the question I would ask is, well, why would we need to change the 20-part test?
Well, I think it's enforcement too. I mean, that's what I've seen. So there's, prevailing wage is active now, and there's, and there's a lot of other, I think laws in place that are designed to be helpful and things like that. But I can tell you, I've never ran into any enforcement. I mean, none of our projects that I'm aware of or that I've directly managed have ever had any kind of enforcement agency show up to ask around. Nothing like that. So I don't know that just laws in place. I don't think I think there would need to be action behind that. It needs to be enforcement to whatever's in place, in my opinion.
Senator Kim O'Leary.
Yes, just really quickly, I mean, that's the point of the bill, right? We are increasing penalties, we are increasing transparency, we're increasing the availability of anonymous complaints. That's the point, right? Because there is not that mechanism in place today that is deterring this action from happening, and so we've got to strengthen it.
Mr. Howe, in your recent comments, do I gather that at one point you were a misclassified worker?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Like when you went to work?
Yeah. I'll just kind of briefly tell you my experience with that. I was kind of fresh out of high school, and I had gotten a start in construction, and I was an employee doing some landscaping. We did like brick and block work, and then a friend of mine was doing roofing, and his who he was doing roofing for needed help, and he told me about some of the money he was making, and it was better than what I was getting, and so I went over there. I did that. It was I had no idea what 1099 subbing was. I just knew that when this job got done, I got this amount of money, and it was pretty cool. And it was a whole bunch of other young guys doing that kind of thing, and there was all kinds of. The people that had done it longer had all the tricks for how to report that income and what to write off, and to basically how to get the least amount of taxes paid on the stuff that was reported. There was a lot of jobs that were just paid out in cash and unreported, and it was and that was just the way that stuff was done. It was kind of a culture there at that work site, and I think back to that and think, my God, if I had fallen off that roof, what would I'd be hung out to dry. I wouldn't be able to earn a living for the young family I had at the time.
And so when you work as a 1099, what documents are you providing to the employer?
Yeah, so I don't.
Or the person to who you're contracting with?
Well, probably, but for I'll just speak to my experience. I really can't. I honestly don't recall. I mean, it was really like, whatever it was like super minimal. I mean, I went to work for a little while before I even knew. I didn't even know that I was 1099 or anything. I mean, I was young. I just was very, I think, naive to the way things worked. And so it was a lot of it I just sort of kind of learned along the way. I don't recall having to really do anything, although I'm sure, maybe there was, something signed, a waiver. I don't know. I don't recall, though. Yeah. Very informal.
Thank you. Members, other questions? Mr. Howell, I appreciate your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have Amanda Fisher with the NFIB.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And thank you and good morning to the members of the committee. My name is Amanda Fisher, and I'm the State Director for NFIB in Michigan. NFIB represents small and independent businesses in all 50 state capitals in Washington, D.C., and we've been doing it for over 80 years. On behalf of over 11,000 small business owners in Michigan, I am here to express my opposition to Senate Bills 6 and 7. I've provided written testimony. Now, to be fair, the written testimony is on the bill as introduced, since we don't have a sub, but a lot of it is still applicable. A lot of our concerns are still applicable. So I think it's important when we talk about changing the definition of independent contractors, whether it's for construction, whether it's basically continuing to restrict that, it is an issue. And I appreciate that the sponsors recognize that if we were to take on that California model, that could create a lot of unintended consequences and a lot of issues. But again, I think it's hard until I have language to really see, but I think one of the biggest issues in listening to folks testify is that there's already a law in place, and it seems like then we need to look at, I don't like to say this, but enforcement of that current law rather than expanding regulations and going after those and truly going after those bad actors, because there's a big difference too when it comes to small business owners between bad actors and also sometimes people that are maybe unaware or they're just trying to get everything done. So I do want to mention just a couple of things, and I will try and be brief, Mr. Chair. Talking about independent contractors, though, I do want to bring up a study that was done after California, which I think reinforces this idea in case people want to go back to the original bill, that after that, self-employment actually decreased by 10.5% on average for affected occupations. So that's small businesses. We have a lot of sole proprietors that are NFIB members. And those are where a small business starts. You start off one person and then you hire somebody, or maybe you can only afford, you only have a little bit of work, so you hire an independent contractor and then you grow and then that person becomes an employee. And really restricting that definition can really have a negative effect on entrepreneurship, innovation, and growth. Overall employment decreased by 4.4% for the affected occupations, and in California, AB5, which is what it was, didn't really expand regular employment. And so again, in the job classification, I'm going to kind of not go into as much detail right now because I know that we're waiting on language. But there are some other things in this bill that I have some issues with. I think one that requiring an employer to provide the wages and other compensation of employees who are within the same job classification. I understand the reasoning, but I also think, again, we're going to have, this is not great. It's going to have some unintended consequences because it's problematic. It doesn't consider determining factors such as employment gaps, education levels, career changes of employees, and it can be extremely detrimental to a work environment and puts an employer in the unenviable position of having to disclose another employee's private information. And you're like, well, they can redact the name. But if you're in a small office, we all know who everybody is. And that can create a lot of problems. And frankly, you're now violating another employee's right to privacy. Also, the increases in fines and penalties I find especially egregious. Many small business owners serve in multiple roles in business, including HR, and may make unknowing mistakes. I think that they would expose small business owners to massive fines and penalties. I mean, that's a significant increase that you've made, and it now is including felonies and perhaps jail time. And I guess I'm slightly concerned and maybe a little offended because at the same time we have policymakers trying to lessen sentences for violent offenders, and now we're talking about putting small business owners who may have just made some mistakes in jail. And I know that's an extreme example, but I do have issues with that. So I do want to be clear, though, NFIB and its members believe that employers should absolutely follow labor laws and pay their employees accordingly. However, we have to watch and make sure that we're not, our regulations don't make it even more difficult for them to follow the law by being confusing or unclear, and that we also are actually just holding bad actors accountable rather than increasing regulations. Because if you're a bad actor, you're going to figure out how to get around those regulations too. And all you're going to do is really hurt people that are legitimately trying to follow the law. So that's why we are opposing these bills. Again, I appreciate and want to acknowledge the recognition that the original introduced bills would be very harmful. But I did want to share NFIB's concerns.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, are there questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite up Sean Cecil with the Michigan Realtors. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I would like to, my name's Sean Cecil. I'm with the Michigan Realtors. I would like to first and foremost thank the sponsors of the legislation for the continued communication regarding these bills. We are aware of the changes that are being made, and we appreciate them. However, we do still have some reservations on the definition of independent contractor, i.e. the ABC test. Our members are regulated through licensing through LARA, through the occupational code. Bad actors are caught by these rules. By introducing the ABC code, ABC test in Michigan, it has the potential of muddying the waters in the future on who would be considered independent contractors. We would like to see realtors be expressly exempted from this legislation, just like California has. On that, I'll open up to any questions.
So just to clarify, your concern with the bill is in the definition of independent contractor?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Members, questions? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Next, I'd like to invite up Wendy Block from the Michigan Chamber. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Wendy Block. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy for the Michigan Chamber, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today to testify related to our concerns with both Senate Bills 6 and 7. As you've heard this morning from others from the business community, we do have significant concerns with the bills as introduced. Obviously, the bills are a work in progress, so we're looking forward to digging into the details of those substitute bills. But on your desk today, you have a coalition memo signed by 40 different or over 40 different business and trade associations across Michigan. Those groups have banded together to oppose Senate Bill 6 and 7 for a variety of reasons, but primarily because the legislation as introduced would limit the ability of employers to use independent contractors and for workers to work in this capacity by putting in place a California-style ABC test. I would say even if the bills are amended to apply to construction, we likely are still to have concerns because of the impact it would have both on workers and businesses. Now, you've heard this morning from different groups testifying about these labor broker networks, which I'm not familiar with. You heard Mr. Howe's example about fly-by-night contractors and those sorts of things. We want to make clear that we are not condoning these activities. These activities are illegal today under Michigan's current test, and we would agree that this maybe is an enforcement issue. We probably would differ in terms of approach on how you handle those enforcements and encourage you to look more at civil penalties versus criminal penalties. But I think we can agree that the state maybe needs to do a better job of trying to find these fly-by-night entities and to root out that problem. So as I mentioned, Michigan currently follows the economic realities test. We do not believe that that test is broken. And in fact, that is the same test that the Biden administration put in place nationally in 2024. So it becomes a question of if that test was good enough at the federal level under a Democratic administration, why we need to uproot Michigan's test, which mirrors that test, and put in place a California-style ABC test. And the reason we say that and the reason we have so many concerns with the ABC test is because we've seen how this is played out in California. There's over 109 different workers who are exempt from that test today. The Michigan bill as introduced includes no exemptions. It's been messy and complicated. It's created a system of winners and losers and impacted thousands and thousands of businesses and workers across that state. One study suggests that upwards of 64% of independent contractors across California were impacted, and that meant that it impacted their livelihoods, and destroyed entrepreneurial activities. Even lawmakers in California have indicated buyer's remorse. If you just did a Google about this, Assemblyman Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Elk Grove, California, has said the test has killed entrepreneurial spirit in our communities and criticized the test. Senator Stephen Glazer, a Democrat from Orinda, California, has said the legislative approach was all wrong and we should be writing rules to protect workers. Another key concern with the legislation is that wage transparency piece. Sounds great on paper. I think NFIB correctly talked about the unintended consequences of that. And finally, I want to just touch on the penalty provisions in both Senate Bill 6 and 7. Again, we believe in a strong civil enforcement system, more public awareness about the state's wage and fringe benefit laws, but under the bills, you're talking about throwing business leaders in prison for upwards of 20 years, making that a felony. And it isn't even clear who would be guilty of these violations. Is it the payroll department? Is the CEO? Is it the manager? Just really think that those provisions need to be rethought and to be more narrowly drafted and I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think you get my point. So that concludes my remarks. I thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So I just want to make sure, ask for a couple clarifications. Sure. So when we're talking about the ABC test, we're talking about the definition of independent contractor that's in the bill as drafted.
Correct.
And in the letter, and I think I heard you say it too, you referred to the 6-factor test. So I want to make sure I understand that the coalition in the chamber is supportive of using that as a definition for independent contractor?
So Michigan case law today relies on the economic realities test. And so I will point out that under our unemployment and our workers' compensation law, we talk about the IRS test. There might need to be more universal use of that, but employers in the real world are looking at the most strict test that's out there, which is that economic realities test. And that is the law today from a more global standpoint.
And that's the definition that you think we should be using?
I think you are using it.
Well, you
yeah.
think we should continue to be using it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what's broken with the test today. I think everything you've heard today from people testifying, and when this issue was debated in the House last session, same thing. It's illegal under the law today. It's not being caught. It's not being enforced. So it seems like you have an enforcement issue and maybe a public awareness issue that people who are just setting up shop and selling their services on Thumbtack and other places, they don't know what their obligations are. Let's double down on that sort of thing rather than just saying, we need a new test. The test is broken. Well, is the test broken? And I would encourage you to ask Leo that. Do they believe the test is broken, or do they believe that this is really an enforcement issue, an awareness issue?
But your organization is happy with the current definition used in Michigan?
I mean, it's the test that the courts use, and I've not heard anyone say grumbling about it. It is what it is. They have to do it, and no one's saying we should go backwards.
Okay. Members, questions? Senator Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Block, for your testimony. Could you maybe explain the difference between what this ABC test is and what the status quo is? Like, how is it more restrictive? How would it actually work?
Yeah, so I'm certainly no expert on determining who is and isn't an independent contractor, but under the ABC test, the employee has to meet all three factors, and basically the first factor is that the individual is free from control and direction of the payer in connection with the performance of the work, both under contract and in fact. Number two, the individual performs work that is outside the usual course of the payer's business. And then finally, and third, you have to be customarily engaged in independent established trade, occupation, or business of the same work performed by the individual or payer. If you don't meet all three of those factors, you cannot be determined an independent contractor. Now, where we talk about our current test, the economic realities test, as I understand it, and again, I'm not an expert, but it is a totality of the circumstances type test where you look at any number of factors and you say, in totality, is this person an independent contractor or not? So it isn't like, oh, if you don't meet number two, you're out. You have to be in a strict employer-employee relationship. It is more of a looking at all of this and making a determination, yes or no. But again, I think today's test with these things about getting paid under the table and not getting workers' compensation for the workers, under both tests, they would not be able to be properly classified as an independent contractor.
Additional questions, members? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Cook, would you like to read in the cards? Well, those are all the folks we have testifying, and we will adjourn after the cards are read in.
On Senate Bill 6 alone, Clark Karcher, DoorDash opposes. Dick Van Covering, Insurance Alliance of Michigan opposes. Remainder of the cards are on both Senate Bills 6 and 7. Donna Boss, Fidelity Language Resources opposes. Steve Japinga, Lansing Regional Chamber opposes. The West Michigan Policy Forum opposes. Robert Jorg, Michigan Laborers supports. Dave Worthams, Michigan Manufacturers opposes. Brian Schoaf, Detroit Regional Chamber opposes. Rob Anderson, Michigan Farm Bureau opposes. Jill Sokaz, Michigan Trucking Association opposes. Shane Hernandez, ABC Michigan opposes. Jacob Manning, Small Business Association opposes. Dawn Crandall, Home Builders Association opposes. John McNamara, Michigan Restaurant Lodging Association opposes. Jacqueline Dolce, Grand Rapids Chamber opposes. Patrick Schaefer, Michigan League for Public Policy supports. And Steve Dooley, Mackinac Center opposes.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Appreciate everybody's testimony today. And With that, there being no further business without objection, the Senate Committee on Labor is now adjourned.